Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very special LGBT History Month event brought to you by Cherish Hounslow, a mental health and wellbeing partnership between Naz and Metro Charity, funded by West London Mint Team. And for those of you who don't know what the Mint Team is, it's a mental health integrated network team. So you can see why it's been abbreviated to Mint. My name is Parminder Sekon, and I'm the CEO of Naz, which is a HIV and sexual health charity set up over 30 years ago, working with Black, Brown, and racially minoritized communities. Tonight, we are delighted to share with you the work of Sabah Choudrey, a Hounslow resident, proud youth worker, psychotherapist in training, and a long-standing Naz volunteer counsellor. And I have to say, we're very, very proud of having Sabah as part of our team. A renowned public speaker, many of you will have seen Sabah's TED Talks and numerous online videos. They're an educator, an activist. Sabah is very, very accomplished indeed, and an author. So Sabah's debut book, Supporting Trans People of Colour, How to Make Your Practice Inclusive, has just been published a few weeks ago. And having read it, I am very much persuaded that this is a must-have resource for all mental health practitioners, and not just for those working on issues of gender identity. The disparity of unequal health outcomes for trans people compared to cisgendered people, both in terms of physical and mental health, it's a serious issue and needs to be urgently addressed and reversed. More and more young people are taking control over their gender identity and finding language and terms that resonate with them. And I do think it's incumbent on us, professionals working in the sector, to be really inclusive in our practice and messaging. Me, as an older lesbian, cisgendered identified feminist, I'm more than ever aware of how our liberation struggle is really innately entwined, and always has been, with trans rights, and how mutual recognition and alliance and solidarity are really the only ways that we can achieve true equality and social justice. Tonight, Sabah is going to be in conversation with Joel Robinson, a trans queer guy who works as a private counsellor and is interested in the intersection of LGBTQ and people of colour, and is a therapist for the Black LGBTQ Therapy Fund. He's head of HIV and mental health at Metro Charity, and is an equality and which everyone knows is an equality and diversity charity, but has worked in the West London Partnership on the Naz Hounslow programme as well. Joel is an ordained Buddhist in the Thiriratna Buddhist community and runs events and meditation and retreats and for the gender diverse community. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joel now, who's going to lead the conversation this evening.
Thanks, Parminder. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I'm also really excited that Sabah is here this evening. And we've got about an hour, so we're going to finish at 7 o'clock. So I just thought I'd say a little bit about how the structure of the event will go, and then I'm going to hand over to Sabah. So we're going to basically hear some readings from the new book from Sabah. And then I'm going to ask a few sort of starter questions, but we're really keen that people who are tuning in and listening also ask questions. So whatever platform you're listening on, you can post there, and our team will feed in the questions, and we'll make sure that hopefully we'll leave enough time for Sabah to answer them. So I'm going to hand over to Sabah, who's going to do a few readings for us.
Oh, thank you so much, Joel. And thank you, Parminder, for that really heartfelt introduction. And just thank you to Naz and Metro for making this event happen. I've got, history with Metro and Naz. So it's just really nice to kind of come back and have this lovely little partnership event. And thanks to everyone who's watching on the live stream, or if you're watching it back. Write a comment, let us know how you found the event as well. So I just wanted to read a little bit from my book to you. And actually, as it is LGBT History Month, I thought I would start there. So here we go. History months are about many things, such as education, celebration, and commemoration. They're an opportunity for schools, universities, workplaces, and charities to share histories that aren't often known, to spotlight local LGBTQ and Black trailblazers and role models, and to take the opportunity to do more for the LGBTQ and Black people that they work with or support. From running panel discussions and campaigns and launching resources to running a new curriculum or extracurricular activities or partnering with LGBTQ or Black organizations, there are many ways to honor LGBTQ History Month. In the UK, February marks LGBTQ History Month and October marks Black History Month. And in 2019, the UK launched South Asian Heritage Month. This was an opportunity to explore how intertwined British history is with South Asian history, to exchange stories, to build relationships, and to speak on the injustices also happening within the community as well. Ruby Bukhari, who was one of the event coordinators of the first South Asian Heritage Month, writes, "There is a clear demand for further investigation and conversation on gatekeepers, colorism, systemic and structural racism, and lack of opportunities. Commemorating history and heritage should not shy away from the injustices of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism that have shaped the trans people of color communities and identities today. Instead, confront the discomfort and do not allow history to repeat itself by learning from it." History months do face criticism from LGBTQ, Black, and people of color communities when this doesn't happen, where we are erased and silenced once again, misheard and misrepresented. History months can easily miss many of the same nuances and planning that have been previously mentioned when delivering campaigns. So approach history months with an intersectional and critical lens. Look back on the history that we have been taught and view it with a trans or gender diverse lens or a Black lens. Where are trans people of color within history? Just because they aren't on the page in front of us doesn't mean that they weren't there or contributing to the history that we are told. Be critical and be curious. History is not neutral or objective. It shows when we only platform white celebrities and historical figures during LGBTQ History Month, or when we only have predominantly men, cisgender people, or non-Black people of color during Black History Month. We are not just celebrating one identity or one community during these months. When we don't celebrate the whole community is not being seen. Trans people of color and Black trans people have contributed so much as activists, fighters, and speakers. And it's the same systems of oppression that they were fighting that erase their contributions from history. There's so much connection in the fight for human rights. And historically, LGBTQ and Black movements have supported each other. Black LGBTQ activists shaped the civil rights movement. Bayard Rustin, Stormé de la Vera, Ernestine Eckstein, Phil Wilson, Miss Major Griffin Gracie, and trans women of color that led LGBTQ movements, Marsha Pate Nomine Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. The Stonewall Uprising, which is also known as the Stonewall Riots, has been documented and retold as an event that defined the LGBTQ rights movement that we know today. However, that was not possible without the dedication and leadership of trans women of color who committed to the survival and the rights of LGBTQ homeless youth, sex workers, and people of color. Acknowledging the failings of archivists, curators, and storytellers, when we can only find the same white cisgender or heterosexual stories, we can speak out about the erasure or the omission. That in itself tells a story. Do not continue cycles of erasure and include the activists and change makers who are still missing, such as youth, disabled, and intersex voices. We must preserve trans people of color legacies and ensure that we know that they have paved the way for all of us to be here today. When Black History Month is finished, we don't stop being Black. When LGBTQ History Month is finished, we don't stop being LGBTQ. That's Lady Phil, founder of UK Black Pride. There is so much to celebrate and honor in the lives, both lost and present, of trans people of color. Travis Alabanza, a writer and performer, wrote, "Trans femmes are the past, present, and future. We are all the possibilities your world could be. We are deserving of your love, protection, affection. All our communities are richer because of the contributions of Black trans people, trans women and trans femmes of colour, trans people of colour, faith and religion, neurodivergent trans people of colour, and trans people of colour with disabilities. We can learn so much from trans people of colour, his, her, and their stories. So let's make sure we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabah. Yeah, it's really rich and very quite sort of dense, isn't it, in terms of the readings you chose? I was thinking there's just so much in there, and also one thing that came up for me, which we didn't mention in the intro while I was listening to you, was just well, that sense of having solidarity with each other as human beings and as communities of people. And I was just thinking, you know, today reading the news about the invasion of Ukraine, you know, just get that sort of sense from your readings of this solidarity and heart that you're talking to about how,
Absolutely.
you know, we can do terrible things to each other, and it's mainly because of our differences, our so-called racial differences, national differences. And so, yeah, I was just sort of like, yeah, struck by that in the readings and that parallel with what, you know, what's going on today. And I'm aware people might have come with, you know, that sense. And I was just thinking about the Eastern European communities in Hounslow as well, you know, and what sort of diverse community it is. So yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. In terms of now I'm going to get that little buzzing sound off my computer. So in terms of I was thinking about a question that came out of your book for me was you said this beautiful sort of quote, which from your book. So the moment I spoke and wasn't heard, this book started writing itself, you said. So the moment I spoke and wasn't heard, this book started writing itself. And I wondered if you could describe what it's like to speak and not be heard, you know, to be perhaps the only trans person of colour in the room. And, you know, what keeps you going? What keeps you wanting to speak and be heard? You know, maybe you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Yeah, and thanks for just naming what's also going on outside of our screens. I think it's important that we don't ignore that. So thank you. But yeah, it's I was actually just trying to think back, like, yeah, how did I feel just being? I mean, because I talk about it now, you know, being the only trans person of color in the room, or the only trans person in a space, or the only person of color in a space. But I don't think I really realized, like, I think I didn't realize that for a while, because I just normalized like that as my position in the room, or that, you know, that white people or cis people as the norm. So I didn't really know how it felt to start with. It just felt normal. But then I think after time, you know, kind of feeling a kind of well, to use a therapeutic term, incongruent, like a kind of something that wasn't quite matching, you know, where I just wasn't being represented, I wasn't being seen, I didn't see myself reflected in other people or their experiences. And it felt really difficult. It felt really like hard and painful almost, because I didn't know what to do to change it, or where to go to feel better, to feel reflected or seen. And it was that kind of desperate feeling of wanting to be, just seen. You know, I think often we hear phrases about how important representation is in our communities. Dr. Ronks, who's an incredible doctor and activist and speaker, has this motto: you cannot be what you do not see. And it's so true. Like, and just I know that when I couldn't see myself reflected, I just didn't feel real. Like, I didn't feel like I should exist, or like the feelings I had were valid. You know, there's that kind of internal voice that I know a lot of trans people have, is like, am I trans enough if I don't look like this, or if I'm not doing you know, this kind of medical transition or social transition in this kind of way. So it was a lot of desperation and that kind of drove me to speaking up, to writing, publicly for the first time, which was about, I started writing publicly because I had just come out as trans, and I was going through social and medical transition, and I couldn't find any trans people of color, any brown trans people, South Asian, Pakistani trans people who looked like me. So I was like, okay, let me start and just see what happens. So it's not like, I don't know, I feel like when people ask me this question, I'm like, it's not been like a really, there's not a real like love or passion there's passion in the drive, but it's not like a choice. And I think that happens for quite a few people who are on the margins, who are just trying to survive, that we create, and we lead and we carve space because we need it. Like, we need it with a capital N. We need it. It's not just like, this would be nice actually if we had if we felt safe. It's like, no, we need to feel safe. We need to be seen. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking, in your book you say something about how the trans experience that's talked about is often the white trans experience, and there's also a sense, isn't there, that queerness is hidden in Black and brown communities. And so I wonder if you could say a bit about that, about you don't hide, do you? And you have found your voice, which I'm sure massively inspires others. But has it felt different for you in a way, I imagine in different spaces it feels different, whether you feel included or excluded or seen or heard or...
And I think, hiding is an interesting word. I mean, I don't think it means that we as people of color are hiding our queerness. It's just that because queerness is viewed through the lens of a white Western, through a white Western lens, that that hides the queerness, because gender expression and sexuality just looks different in other cultures and other parts of the world. So that is hidden, but I don't think we as people of color are hiding it. And sorry, your question about different spaces, could you repeat that again?
Well, I suppose like, I often think white folks like myself can really struggle with an intersectional lens. So when we were putting this together, I was aware your book is about trans people of color, and like, I might have some experiences of being trans, but also I have experiences of being white, and so that's my racial experience. But there's a sort of sense that somehow the two things, being trans and a person of color, somehow are separate experiences. Do you see what I mean? Whereas when you write, your voice is so strong that these are things that are within you and integrated within you in your experience. So
because I mean, I couldn't really separate the two. I mean, I think I did. I tried. I tried to just kind of what's the word? Just kind of detach myself from my ethnicity, from my skin tone, from my culture of being Pakistani, my faith of being Muslim, but it was never going to be completely separate. I think there was a time when I was living in Brighton, and I just had this moment of like, I am being treated differently than my white housemates, my white peers, and my white girlfriend. I was like, this is, and that's like, I just couldn't ignore these differences, like very subtle microaggressions, or sometimes not so subtle, but it was just, I think it was hard. It was hard to get to kind of integrate myself, or put, talk as everything, because it's painful. Like, again, there's that, sadness of like, oh yeah, like, I actually can't control this. I'm always going to be seen as brown. I'm going to be transitioning from being a brown woman to a brown man. It's not, these kinds of, my gender will always be racialized, and I don't have any control over that. And then then there's the other kind of perspective of, the perceptions that come along with it. One of the one of the things that I've experienced is just like, yeah, being a brown man. Like, what is that like? Like, what is it, you know, being a, you know, sometimes a visibly Muslim brown man. And it's just this whole other, yeah, it just made it, I just feel so aware of how gender and faith and race are so interconnected. So it's yeah, I mean, it feels comfortable now to talk about, because I can understand it, and these kind of all these systems that kind of work together and shift. Yeah,
because I was thinking in your book you talk about growing up in Hounslow, and then you talk about sort of moving away to Brighton, but then also you've come back, haven't you, to Hounslow? And I was wondering what, because they're quite different places, aren't they? Brighton, very traditionally very kind of queer, but also very white, and then Hounslow, very kind of multicultural, a lot of black and brown people, and your home as well. So I wondered if you had any reflections on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I was. I mean, first of all, I'm just so excited to be, having this kind of event, like virtually, but in Hounslow, and just seeing how much I guess, how much attention and is being paid to to Hounslow, and not just LGBTQ communities, but just mental health and well-being. So this feels very special. I've been back in Hounslow for maybe 6 or 7 years now, but I'm just like immensely proud of it. And all my friends are just like, you live so far away, and I'm like, well, come and try the samosas, and then you will make the distance. But yeah, like, growing up in Hounslow, yeah, it was that was part of me trying to distance myself from my culture. I was like, I don't want to, let me move to Brighton, let me go to this very queer city but very white city, and just kind of leave some of that behind. And I think that was also kind of known in my family as well, like it was more felt, should I say. But it's funny going to Brighton, and I suddenly became very aware of my brownness, and then coming back here, I came back here as a different gender. I come out as trans in Brighton, and I came back here, and that was really just an experience, I guess. I come back to the home I was born and raised in, the same neighbors, the same street, everything. And I had to come out to my neighbors and just tell them, and tell my family who haven't seen me for a while, and this kind of like gradual process started happening. But actually it was really positive and really lovely. And one of the things that I just want to share is my neighbor, who is a GP. She manages a GP practice. She's auntie, but we're not related, but everyone's auntie, she was like, just listening to me, and was like, we need to know this stuff, like in our GP practice, like. And I was so I work for trans youth charity called Gender Intelligence, and I was telling her about my work as well, and she was like, can we get some information? And so then I gave her some posters and about, like, just this is the charity. If you're trans, if you're questioning your gender, you can call us. And it was just really great. I was like, oh, that feels so nice. Like, it's not just, oh yeah, we accept you. It's like, how can we work harder to accept you and other trans people in Hounslow? Like, it just felt, it really meant a lot to me. And I think that's what I'm feeling as well when when I hear about the Mint project, and what's the other one called? Is it Cherish or something? Just that there's a real active effort into making sure that Hounslow is a safe place for LGBTQ people. Because when I came back to London, I was like, oh God, I really have to travel all the way to central London or to other parts of London to have a sexual health screening, or to speak to a GP about something. And that just doesn't, I didn't want to do that. I don't want things to just kind of stay yeah, just to stay there, because it's not accessible for everyone. Yeah, so it just, yeah, it over the past few years, like I just have really, I don't know, I feel like things are changing, like Middlesex Pride as well. I was kind of doing a bit of volunteering with them, and that just meant so much to me, just to have, yeah, just the kind of a bit of a spotlight on us. I know Gunsbury Park have also run some really awesome events, and of course Naz, 10 Hammersmith Broadway as well. They also like a service that I use that are really trans inclusive, and it just really matters, that kind of spotlight, and that's kind of held by organizations, you know. Yeah, so I'm going on a bit of a Hounslow kind of sappy little story.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice to hear about your community and, you know, where you grew up and how you're feeling now about it. And because linked to that, I was really struck quite early in your book. You talk about how being from a South Asian family, there's this sense of, although you sort of rebelled and in a way went away from your family, and it seems to be like something to do with queerness, that you needed to sort of separate, but equally being from a community that's quite vulnerable to feeling more marginalized, it's like the separation story is not the same, is it? Like I was thinking, you know, I grew up in the north of England in a white family, and I did sort of run away to London, as it were. But also in London, I found lots of white people and lots of queer people who looked like me. So I felt very sort of, and you know, I've maintained good links with my family, but it's not really the same, isn't it? Like I was thinking about practitioners when they're thinking about how to include trans people of colour. I was really struck in your book by you just sort of saying, well, it doesn't really make much sense to try and split from your family in that way, that it's quite a white Western narrative, I think, isn't it, for queer folks, is to somehow, break away from family and perhaps never go back. I mean, I know I'm generalizing, but I wondered if you could say a bit more about that, because that seemed quite key in your book, that it wasn't going to be you weren't going to break away in that way.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said as well about that the kind of white and Western like trans narratives just become the narratives, you know, the things that you do, and this is what happens next. Because I've heard from some trans youth, and even just, you know, my own experiences of talking to healthcare professionals and gender kind of doctors at gender identity clinics, that, you know, it's, have you changed your name? Have you done this? Have you told your parents? Do your parents, is your family supportive? If not, why are you still living there? You know, move out, it's unsafe. You know, the kind of this kind of like process, but it's just not as simple as that. You know, we don't just leave our families. You know, it's taken my family conversations over years around, you know, just so they understand me. And I know it's also language as well. You know, I can't really, I think I was quite angry when I first came out as trans, which was completely righteous. I think that's a very valid emotion to feel, you know, that I wasn't finding a place. And I would get really upset with pronouns, and I'd be misgendered a lot by my family members. But I think I just started to kind of realize, like, yes, it is about, you know, respecting me, and it's that, you know, English is not their first language. You know, gender is, they don't mean that gender, like he, him, and she, her, just doesn't mean the same things for people whose English. Well, I'm thinking about particular family members. It just doesn't mean the same thing, you know. Then they misgender everything all the time. It's just I just started to kind of soften and really start to deeply feel that, you know, it's more about it's kind of a deeper kind of acceptance that was happening. Yeah, this sucks, but I think it's just yeah, it's bigger than, for me, it was bigger than pronouns. And I know this is just purely my own personal experience. And I wanted family there, you know, I wanted the support of my family. I think it wasn't really an option to like not have them in my life or to give them ultimatums. And I think that's a really lovely part of South Asian culture that I really love, that we are together and we are close. And I think that's also how I feel anyway, in like my queer South Asian communities as well. You know, we're there for each other. We're kind of, you know, we're a group, we're a community. Yeah,
because I was also really struck in the book because you said about your name, that you know, like you say, when you went to the clinic, the gender identity clinic, it had all these tick boxes, and one of the things was you didn't want to change your name, and you know, that it was a gender neutral name, and that they didn't understand.
Exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, and it's just you just start to realize, like, oh, you really are working from one perspective, and there's no room around this for you to see that there are other ways to be trans. There are other narratives out there, and it left me feeling really, like I wasn't trans enough, or I was doing something wrong. And it's hard when it's those are the people who are in positions of power, who are the kind of the gatekeepers to you accessing further healthcare, to accessing the treatment that you need. It's really tough, and I mean, I think that's, you know, I think those experiences are echoed even, you know, for non-binary people as well, accessing healthcare. You know, it's still a lack of understanding around what it means. So yeah, from healthcare professionals, I just don't think we understand the impact of it. Although actually, I did a talk last year online, and it was with gender identity clinicians, and I was talking about the book and about my experiences, especially particularly in healthcare, and I'm 99% sure that my endocrinologist, who I had this discussion with, was there, and I was repeating this interaction that we had, and things that he said to me and how it made me feel, and I was like, I really think that's him. But it just felt, I was like, yeah, you know what, it might be like 8 years later, but I still want you to hear this. That was, sorry, I just remember that again. That was quite a moment. So my point is that he is learning, and he is like understanding in that moment, oh, you know, that was my experience. And so yeah, I think there are changes definitely happening, you know, that to be able to say that to my endocrinologist, who was, you know, slightly narrow-minded, I think that's progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think in the book you very much talk about things being a work in progress. Like, I'm aware sometimes people want really quick and easy answers, don't they? Like, you know, a title of a book like yours, How to Support Trans People of Colour Better. It's like you very much say, oh, it's like a process, and that we're all bound up in it together. And that it isn't like you've given a book with like all the answers, because you can't, because it's much more relational than that. And that example of going back to your endocrinologist 8 years on is an example of how things change, isn't it? And you know, so I was thinking a bit about that, as you've written the book for practitioners who are in support roles. However, I think you have a much wider view, don't you, of, in a way, like, do we need to be supported, or are we just in a really dynamic kind of process together? You know, I mean, there's a lot of power dynamics, isn't there, in things like accessing healthcare, but also there are these moments where something much more creative can happen, perhaps, and you talking to your endocrinologist is a moment where things, you know, there can be insight and things can change. I wondered if you have any reflections on the balance of that. It's like I always think practitioners need to be competent enough to make the interactions safe, but equally you want to keep alive to the fact that you want to learn as a practitioner, don't you? It's like, I don't know quite what I'm trying to get at, but something about the energy of how to be more inclusive, perhaps, that's not just like you reach for a book off the shelf and it happens,
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and maybe you could probably share as well, like how do you make your own practice more inclusive? But I think it's about doing all of the things. Like, it is about getting the book off the shelf, it is about going to that training or that workshop, it is about asking your client, your patient, the person you're supporting as well, and it is about you having a little Google afterwards and having those conversations. I think it's really about all of those things, and I think that's why there is no like one answer, because it's in all of the ways that oppression shows up in our lives, like it's internal, it's kind of personal, it's organizational, it's institutional, it's global, it's all of these different dynamics that oppression shows up. We then need all our support, our kind of fight, and our unlearning to be on all of those levels as well, on all those kind of micro and macro levels. So it's I think that's, I mean, what about you? I know you talked a little bit about me beforehand about your own kind of journey.
I think for me, a door really opened a couple of years ago when I sort of realized I was like leading with my more minority identity and being trans and queer, and stepping into the room and actually starting to look at what was hidden, which around race for me was my whiteness. Somehow that was the background wallpaper, literally, still is in this room. And therefore it was like, okay, there's where there's an edge for me. There's where, I think in your book you talk about white people having to go away and talk to other white people quietly about race, and I could not agree more. I'm not sure. In a way, I've done quite a bit of that over the last couple of years, talking to other white people about our racial heritage, about our racial experiences, and all with, in a way, realizing how bound up we are in racial struggle together. But I'm no use to a person of color around anti-racism if I don't understand my own racialized experience. So I think that's why your book sort of really chimes with me. It's like somehow stepping out of the place of the oppressed and that minority identity that I have, being trans, and into like, oh, I am the oppressor sometimes. And what does that mean then? What do I have to look at then? And I really like that in your book. You very much sort of say, oh, it's not about being one or the other, but you've got to look at both in a way. In what ways do you have privilege? And I mean, maybe there's a question back to you about the privilege you have and how you do that thing of, because I think at one point you say you got a bit bored of talking about how you might be oppressed or marginalized because it's quite depressing, isn't it? And you stepped into something much more creative, which is, my sense is that the book is about that, about potentiality. And
well, I just I think I just realized that going to LGBT events and pride events and talking about my experience of being a trans person of color or being queer Muslim, just I wasn't saying anything new or like things that we didn't know. Like, we know that these communities are oppressed because that's why we're trying to invite them in or putting a spotlight onto their experiences. The media and stereotypes and everything will tell us about what we think about this community. So why am I up here telling you about harassment and transphobia and violence and blah 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 blah? And I just felt it didn't help me. It didn't help me feel better because it just didn't, and it didn't. I don't think it helped the audience either to just kind of listen to sad tales about transphobia. How are they? I mean, yes, that can enable, people to move and connect on an emotional level to my struggle, but that's not the emotion I think is a sustainable one. Like, I want a more active kind of engagement. And like you say, like, when people realize that they are part of my story, like in it, because they are the oppressors, they're part of the system that has harmed me, then I think something deeper kind of changes or sparks, because then they're part of that story. They're like, yeah, you're putting yourself into the picture. So I started talking about masculinity and male privilege, sexism, misogyny, and of course that feeds into trans and gender diverse communities. But I'm not starting there. I'm starting with I know who I am. I know I benefit from male privilege. I pass as a man, and most of the time that's what keeps me safe. So I start there usually, and that I start with power and privilege instead of what all the ways I'm impressed, which I think people are expected. But I just think it's so important, and I mean this is part of the reason why I've written this book, is because of my power, my privilege. It's not been. I know I know what privileges I've received. That means I've gotten to this place, and I think that was part of the reason why it was kind of hard to write this, because I was like, I kind of doubted myself when I wasn't really seeing. What happened? I just kind of shifted and viewed. I have this opportunity. I have this. I can kind of make use of this power that I have to write this, and it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It doesn't have to be. I'm talking for all trans people of color. Like, I can just be writing as me from this position of privilege. I am, as a South Asian person, as a masculine person. And I can do what I can to make sure that there are other voices in here, and try and just kind of check myself. And I would speak to my friends and other people, people I trust around me. And I think, I think it really helped. I'm saying this because it was a really long process, because I had this whole kind of internal kind of struggle, like imposter syndrome. I think we've heard of that phrase a few times. But and what I'm trying to highlight is that this is honestly just it's a celebration for all our trans people of color communities and voices. And the one thing that made it easy to write and to finish was just how many other people I've included. I've been joking about not being an academic, or not being a very good one. And actually this reference list is one of my favorite things to read. This includes so many incredible people, the only reference list I will ever have that feeling about.
That's nice, isn't it? It's like a sense of that it's a collective endeavor somehow. And you quote a lot, don't you, from different people, like people who inspire you. And it's very beautifully written in that way, just conjuring lots of different ideas and quotes from various places. It's very rich.
Thank you.
I was thinking a little bit about that idea of, we talked a little bit, didn't we, about sort of racial experience and racial difference. I was wondering a little bit about the sort of difference between cis and trans folks, and that sense of a shared kind of gender spectrum. So, like, I often say to people, if you want to understand trans or non-binary people, you better understand that you have a gender too, and that you have gender issues yourself, in a way, that we're all just, in a way, in a process around gender. I mean, who hasn't been in a process around gender since they were born, in a way? We're always changing, aren't we? And we're always subject to pressures often around gender and histories and things we all carry. But I suppose it'd be interesting for you to hear what do you think practitioners could do to get in the conversation there? Because I still see, you know, in my own circles, not only people of colour othered, but also trans and non-binary people othered. And then you've written about this kind of double whammy of othering there. So yeah, any thoughts about that, about this mutual conversation, I suppose?
I mean, honestly, Joel, I think what you said is what I would do, you know, just putting the question back to cis people and being like, well, you know, what about your gender? You know, make space to explore that, or to white people to explore your own whiteness, your own relationship to your whiteness. I think that's it. Yeah. Do you use any particular tools or anything when you have those conversations?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because I've done a lot of my sort of reflecting on gender and race, particularly in sort of like counselling communities and training, but also in the Buddhist community that I'm part of. We've done quite a lot of work around race, and you know, that thing I said about talking to white people quietly over there, i.e. by quietly I assume you mean not making a big fuss about it, you know. So it's like white people doing the work in a way to talk to each other about our racialized experience and what that means for us and other people. But I've done that dominantly within a Buddhist context, which I think says something about where maybe I felt safe doing that work to become, you know, Buddhism is like many faiths about kindness and acceptance and sort of growth and, you know, becoming awake, working with our minds. So my sense is that I've been able to do that, but only in certain places, you know, where I felt like met and where there's been an openness, I suppose. And one thing we haven't touched on loads is faith, isn't it? I know you mentioned before that you're a Muslim, and so I wondered about where are these places where we can have these conversations, I suppose. I mean, it's not everywhere, is it? It's
but you said you used the word when you're talking about your own conversations with your Buddhist community that was, you know, that's where you feel safe, and I think that's it. You know, we can't just expect us to go and have these explorations into our own gender or into our race or our whiteness just like that. Like we need to be safe and have kindness and have compassion and all those things that sometimes faith can bring us, but also just having just somebody there who you trust. I think that's so important. It's because it's not easy, you know. It's a lot of these things touch on shame, and you know, that's a really heavy emotion and can bring up so many different feelings. So definitely taking some time to do that. So I know we've got a question, and there's which questions do I answer? I know we've only got a short little while left as well.
Yeah, we've got a big seems like a big banner across our screen. So shall I just ask you that one and see if you connect to that? So it's a question from Parminder. So can you talk about the power of acknowledgement and recognition in your life from different quarters and what that's brought to your life?
I'm imagining that means that's around like being seen in like my South Asian community, my Muslim community, my trans community. But I mean, one of the things that is just kind of first comes to mind is about the power of acknowledgement and recognition from my family, from my community, from my Hounslow community. I think it's meant so much because, like I said, I felt like I had to leave Hounslow to feel like I could really fully live my queer little lesbian rainbow mohawked life. But I think, I don't know, I guess I didn't really think that I needed Hounslow to be anything, but now that I'm here, and my family. I see them often, and I'm my neighbours and everything. They know that I'm trans, and they know that I've written this book, and it just means so much. And I think it just made me feel like I don't have to go anywhere else to find myself, which sounds really cheesy as I'm saying it, but I really don't. I don't need to be to go anywhere else to feel safe, to feel accepted, to feel seen and loved and cared about. Like these places can exist where we are, and I'm particularly mean this for like other trans people of color. Like these places can exist where we are, and they should. Like we deserve that. We really, really deserve that. And I think that's why it's so important that we have other people who are supporting us, our allies or comrades, whatever you want to call them, but we need people on our side to help make that happen. To have organizations like Naz and Metro being like, hey, this is what we're doing in Hounslow now, but also like, your auntie who works in the GP to be like, let's make this a bit better for the other people, other trans people around here. It's it's all those different actions that just feel that just mean a lot. I hope that answered the question. Of course, I had any excuse to talk about Hounslow again.
It sounds like Hounslow has felt well that you're very integrated back there. That it's giving you a lot.
It's made me feel, I guess, braver in a way about being myself, and feeling like I can bring myself to all these different parts of wherever I am. I think for a while I kind of hid my job or whatever when I went out with my dad, because a big part of my life was caring for my dad. So we went to a lot of kind of hospital appointments, but also like kind of social spaces for him and other groups as well that supported me as well as him. But I just felt like I could bring more of myself to those spaces. And it helped me, it helped me as well to not have to separate, what who I am, what experience I'm bringing. It just made things better for myself. I have more support. I have more people who care about me, who want to help me, which is really nice. So thanks for that question, Parminder.
Great. So we are in the last 5 minutes. So
Gosh, that went so fast.
It went very quickly.
It's been so great talking to you, Joel.
Likewise, because I was thinking, we want to leave people wanting more, don't we? There's always more, because also what you've written and your own life experience is so rich, of course. But I wonder, I think it's probably time for me to hand back to our host, Parminder, because there's some things we wanted to sort of highlight, didn't we, in the end? And I know you've got a sort of fundraiser for your book as well, so that it can go sort of farther and get out there more and stuff. So why don't we invite Parminder back in by the power of technology? She will be here.
Thank you. Wow, that was really very special to listen to that conversation between you both. So rich, and really so much resonated. And Sabah, I love the fact that you spoke so much about Hounslow, because I was born and brought up in Southall, which is just next door in the London Borough of Ealing. And the way you talk about Hounslow is very much about how I feel about Southall. It's almost like another protagonist. It's more than a place. It's like another protagonist, another character in our lives. Certainly in my life, and a very big character at that. And the hold that it can have over you. And a bit like you, I mean, you went to Brighton, I went to the other side of the country. I went up to Lancashire, and then I went to Birmingham, and then I went to East London because I wasn't coming back west. And like you, have gravitated back closer and closer to Southall. So it was so interesting to hear you talk about all of those things.
Thank you.
But You know, one of the things that I really heard loud and clear was, you know, you can't be what you can't see. And so you doing this event with us today, again, I'm sorry to talk about myself again, but it reminds me of all those little tiny learner lesbian moments where you would kind of look for those things that would reflect back to you who you are. So I imagine, you know, this conversation, which obviously is recorded and will be there for people to return to over and over again, will be a really special place. And as you talked about, you know, we need to create these spaces and cultivate these spaces for ourselves. So that was really special to hear all of that. Your book is out. I know that it's had some very, very brilliant reviews and lots of people have been talking about it. There is a link in the chat about how people can actually go to your website. So that's really easy. People can just Google your name, your website will come up, and the link to the book will come up, and people can order the book. And well, I'm sitting here with mine, so I strongly recommend everybody should have it. And it's a great book because you can dip in, come out, visit again, and it's a kind of a book. And I don't mean to over flatter you, Sabah, far be it from me to do that, but I have a number of Audre Lorde books, which I dip in, dip out when I need to find something, hear something, see something reflected back. And I think for practitioners and non-practitioners, to have a book like this on your bookshelf is really useful. So I'd recommend everybody to go out and order your copy. And as Joel said, there's a fundraiser as well, a crowd fundraiser to help get the word out about the book too. So it just leaves me to say a really big thank you. Thanks for giving us your time and sharing so many personal stories. That's really useful, and it's useful for a lot of people to physically see you and hear your voice. So many, many thanks. And
Thank you so much for creating this space and for having this, you know, live streamed and recorded. I think it's just so important that this can be something that people can access as well in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel. Thank you for holding the conversation, and finally to everybody backstage at Metro looking after our recording this evening. Sabah, we look forward to connecting with you again. LGBT History Month and beyond.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.